What is going on with Ja Morant? I heard Bill Simmons talk about this on the podcast that the Memphis Grizzlies basically made a heel turn this offseason. What is going on with Memphis and Ja Morant specifically?
There's two separate categories here. There's the Memphis category and then there's the Ja Morant category. So I guess the first place to start is Memphis. So last playoffs, Memphis kind of made that heel turn because this was the first year they were actually like legitimately competitive. They got bounced in the play-in of the bubble and then they lost in the first round for a couple years. Memphis was the 2 seed last year. They had made the transformation to becoming a legitimate team with impact in the NBA. And then this year, they've been a top 5-6 team in the NBA this year. And they kind of like embracing the idea of the villain of the league. I mean, Dillon Brooks is kind of becoming one of those agitator guys who people think of and say, I don't like this person, the same way they don't like Patrick Beverley, even though I don't understand. Patrick Beverley's the story everyone claims they love about sports and they just hate him. But Dillon Brooks is kind of becoming that guy.
You know, he tries to play those mind games and get people's heads. So if like your team is going against a Patrick Beverley team, that's why.
Oh, yeah. Patrick Beverley's annoying. I just meant like he played 4 years overseas, then was the 4th point guard, then the 3rd point guard, then the 2nd, and then got the big contract.
But you don't know that in the moment where he's jawing at the referee or your favorite player.
Yeah, I know. It's just why I love Patrick Beverley. But like Dillon Brooks has embraced that role. Ja Morant has clearly embraced that role from a basketball standpoint. When you talk about like the interview he did where he's like, I don't care about anyone in the West. Multiple players on that team have gone out of their way to just trash the Warriors because they're like, you guys are old news. We're the new guys. The Warriors have come back and barked at them. And then the Warriors beat them in the first round or in the second round in part because Ja Morant got hurt in game 4. And the Warriors and Grizzlies have this beef that feels real and legitimate. And it seems like the Grizzlies are the bad guys because, like, except for those 3 years Kevin Durant was there, everyone loves the Warriors. They're the dynastic team. They're the good boys, all that stuff. And so that's the Memphis side of it. From the Ja Morant side of it, man, Ja Morant is going down the villain role of like, not the fun villain role, kind of the villain role of like, oh man, Ja Morant someone might pull up and shoot Ja Morant. And I don't really think that's the kind of villain that we're rooting for in that one. Cause now you've got 4 separate incidents. And once it was like, once is a fluke, twice is a pattern. By incident 4, someone had to step in. And the reason Ja Morant got suspended at least 2 games is not just because of flashing a gun in what could possibly be a Denver nightclub in an IG live video. It is the punching a teenager 12 times and then flashing a gun at him. It's the thing at the mall with his mom and pulling up with 9 other people to harass a mall security officer. And it's people in his group flashing a laser into the team bus of the Indiana Pacers. So when you put all of that together, NBA steps in. Grizzlies decide to suspend him, probably at the direction of the NBA. And we have the situation where we are now.
So do you have a problem at all with them suspending him?
No, because the team has personal conduct policies, and this would seem like a situation, if any other, where, I mean, they kind of framed it differently than being suspended. They were kind of just like, hey, man, go home, take a break. We're not going to pay you for 2 games, but after that, we'll kind of see. It's just, they framed it differently than like suspended for misconduct. So I think it's a little bit different of a situation, but it seemed like a reasonable case considering like the NBA's worked very hard to have that perception of black men yielding guns out of their league image, for better or for worse. And Ja Morant being the one who's directly involved with each of the 3 incidents other than the laser one, which there's not enough details about the laser one, but each of the other 3 incidents, Ja Morant being the one directly involved, either toting the gun or being to quote the whitest person in the world, a rabble rouser. I think that Ja Morant, you could have plausible evidence to say like, hey, this dude kind of has a problem and we kind of need to intervene on this one.
Are we legit worried that something else is going to happen with Ja Morant soon, something more serious perhaps? I mean, hell, he's not out of the water too. You talking about the teenager, like you're punching a teenager. You're assaulting a teenager. That's not a charge that typically just goes away. And then flashing a gun at him this is after a pickup game. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, that one's complex. And the police reports kind of identify the same basic stories there. To your point about is this going to correct his behavior? These are things that take a lot longer, especially because a lot of people are like, oh, Ja Morant's this guy who went to private school in South Carolina and all this stuff about Ja Morant. Like, I think this is just kind of who Ja Morant is. That's more of the problem than anything else, is that the pattern of behavior is who Ja Morant is. And that's going to take more time to change. That's going to have Ja Morant want to change or want to dramatically adjust some of his behaviors and lifestyles.
So I guess what people are hoping is that a suspension, because it's the first tangible accountability effort by either the league or a team, that this could be a wake-up call. I guess to your point is, shouldn't the fact that literally this week those charges came out of the teenager, shouldn't that have been a wake-up call to not go on your IG live and flash a gun?
Well,
I feel as though that's like where you just kind of bury yourself in the shadows. I saw that he deleted his social media today, or at least hid his social media today. You should have done that last week if you were going to do it, not after you get yourself even hotter water.
In fairness, we had known about the punching the 17-year-old thing for a while. It was just reported in the Washington Post along with a whole bunch of other stuff about Ja Morant. I had known about it for a few weeks, that he was out here punching a 17-year-old because the 17-year-old threw a basketball at him. I don't know why this popped off as a story other than the Washington Post collected all the facts and evidence behind it. But the Ja Morant part of that is to the second part of the question you had earlier, which is what if something worse happens? I think what they're hoping for with the suspension and like intervening is that this is the worst that it's going to be. Like, you might have other incidents that maybe don't make national attention or don't lead to a police report, but at the same time, they're just hoping that this is the worst of the incidents. Whether you want to just address it as they're trying to save face and this is about public relations, or they genuinely care about the human being and the star basketball player, regardless of your feelings about whether they actually care or not, they're just hoping that this is the worst of the incidents, even if Ja Morant is not going to like totally change his ways in 5 days, because this seems like more personality type stuff than anything else.
What do you think of a company like Nike putting their arms around Ja Morant and obviously dropping Kyrie Irving due to his anti-Semitic posts, or at least sharing of that Amazon link? And here, just a few months later, they have their new cover boy having these issues.
You get about a certain number of X's on the chart before they sever ties with the relationship. Like, they'll back you up for a few of these things, but if it happens over and over again, there will be a certain point. And apparently for Nike, that point is anti-Semitism. That's the point of no return for Nike on that one. So they will back you for a number. No, beating up minors, you're cool. That one, especially if that's your first strike. If this were like strike 6 or 7, as kind of was the case with Kyrie Irving, then
well, damn, call Adrian Peterson, because Nike should have been behind him in his prime.
That one's different. That one's different because
it's true.
There's
well,
a different.
True. They're beating up your own kid is completely different from beating up someone else's kid.
Also, the difference between a 10-year-old and a 17-year-old by the letter of the law is a little bit different.
Yeah, true. And also 17-year-olds are kind of pieces of shit. So let's be honest. Sometimes it's tempting. I don't know how high school teachers do it. There's like always that tempted.
Also, like, I don't want to like victim blame on the 17-year-old, but the 17-year-old was acting like an adult, playing pickup basketball with people ranging from ages 17 to 40 years old. There was talk that like Mike Miller was there at his house, and the kid, according to reports, threw a basketball at Ja Morant's face, which then led to him getting wailed on 12 to 13 times. And you file a police report because your mom files a police report. I think if it were up to the kid, he might not have filed a police report after getting beaten up 12 to 13 times, but he's 17 years old and his mom's going to file a police report because that's what the law says.
I think things change, especially when you flash the gun, because that's the escalation of circumstances. Because even if he just assaulted the teenager, which is bad enough in itself, obviously, when you flash the gun, you're alluding to doing something much worse, or at least that you have the capabilities of doing something much worse in that circumstance. And I think that Ja, obviously, when it comes to the firearms and stuff, just needs to distance himself from that aspect. And I'm not even against him owning firearms moving forward. I mean, that's certainly his right, but you have to be smarter about it. This is just a smart gun ownership thing too by Ja Morant. If you're just flashing guns in public, well, that's just not a good look by anyone. I think,
well, that's
no
the
matter
part
what
that
side you stand on the gun issue, if you're flashing guns in public, most people will tell you that's a bad idea.
Well, that's the part that makes this story less fun, right? If it were just a story of Ja Morant and his people beat up a 17-year-old, it would be messed up, but people people would have jokes about it. Like, if that were the only story, the thing that escalates it is multiple incidents potentially involving recklessness with guns. Because, like, we got generations of stories around that, NBA and otherwise, that show this is not going to end well. Jason Williams accidentally killed a chauffeur, and that was the end of his career.
I was listening to Plaxico Burress talk this week. Don't follow my footsteps. Hopefully, Ja doesn't accidentally shoot himself in the ass, or however Plaxico did it.
Well, that's the part that makes it less fun. And I said that off the top. Like, I'm cool with NBA villains. I'm not cool with NBA villains where Ja Morant might get shot in the street. Like, that's less fun.
You're cool with NBA villains like jawing off in a interview or on the court when you talk about Patrick Beverley or a Draymond Green, right? Or starting your own podcast. Ja, why don't you just start your own podcast? That would be much safer for everyone. Just get on the mic.
I'll take it a step further. Yeah. Like, you can be an asshole and be a villain, and I will at least be like, okay, cool. You can be an asshole in the NBA. It's less fun when it's like Ja Morant or Dillon Brooks might end up getting shot, or Ja Morant and Dillon Brooks might get themselves in a really bad situation legally.
Yeah, you just gotta be like them at risk. Comic book villain. You know, maybe not comic book villain entirely, but, you know, like cartoony villain, like the twirling mustache villain that, you know, never really gets anything super accomplished, like in the actual criminal realm, but is menacing, I guess.
There's been NBA villains, well, not recently, but for years there's been NBA villains because it makes the stories more interesting if you have someone to root against. And so the Ja Morant story is one where, like, the Grizzlies are cool embracing being the villain, and Dillon Brooks is someone who's an agitator, and Ja Morant's the guy who calls people out by name, and even Desmond Bane is kind of embracing that role a little bit. And I don't know much about Jaren Jackson Jr., but, like, that's kind of their identity.
Now, the real question behind all of this, though, is this Shannon Sharpe's fault?
Not Shannon Sharpe's fault, because Shannon Sharpe, they backed down, man. Shannon Sharpe was ready to fight them boys, and Ja Morant's daddy was pulling up. Multiple Morants were pulling up on Shannon Sharpe, and they did not want the smoke. They did not want the smoke on Shannon Sharpe.
Uncle Shay got in their heads, and they just started a collapse. But anyway, guys, well, we'll leave it up to you. What do you think of this current Ja Morant situation? Do you think the Grizzlies were in the right to suspend him? What do you think of Ja moving forward? Do you still like their chances in the playoffs? I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on all our social medias. From Juju and Kyle, stay safe, happy, and healthy. We will see you next time.